In Kinyarwanda, we say maramutse. Oh, that's pretty good for Canadians. We are also finding the floors cold here in Canada. We had to actually go to the dollar store and pick up Jonathan some $3 slippers just to stop him from sneezing every morning, because as soon as his feet would hit the floor, he'd start to sneeze. So we can relate a little bit to your refugee family that you're welcoming. We've been in Kigali now, in Rwanda, for 2.5 years. We were here I think we were leaving like the next week when we were here before, and now here we are again, and we leave tomorrow. So you're always our last stop because we saved the best to last. All right. So today we're going to tell you a little bit about the last 2 years. But to start, just for those who maybe don't know that much about Rwanda, it's smack dab in the middle of Africa, and it's a very, very small country. It's about the size of Vancouver Island, but it has 12 million people. So if you can imagine life with 12 million people on Vancouver Island, there are people everywhere. So no matter where we go, there are people walking on the sides of the road, no matter what time, well, up to about 10 o'clock at night. After 10, you don't see quite as many. But it is one of the countries that you actually, in Africa, that you can be outside at night because it is very safe right now. So we feel very fortunate that we're in a safe country because all around us there is much turmoil. But in Rwanda right now it is very stable. But it is a country of contrast. We see great poverty, but we also see great wealth at the same time. So it's called the Land of 1,000 Hills. And you're going up the hills and down the hills, up the hills and down the hills, whether you're walking or driving. And the whole country is hills until you get into eastern, which is a little bit more flat. But we've seen people carry things on their heads everywhere. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit about some of the things we've seen. We saw one man carrying a toilet on his head. It was a clean toilet, and it was a new toilet, so that was a good thing. We saw one man with a refrigerator. So now he had the strap where it carried on his back, which is a much more Congolese style, but still to carry a refrigerator all on your own. But here was the most impressive one. A man with an engine block on his head by himself. And his muscles in his neck were just shaking as he was walking. But what that has sort of shown us in Rwanda is that these people are very strong. Not just strong physically, but strong emotionally. They've come through a genocide 22 years ago, and it's been remarkable, the recovery that the country has made. They have a long way to go. It says, reading has told me that it takes 3 generations to get over a genocide, and we're just heading into the second generation now. So we're going to tell you a little bit more about that in a bit.
Rwanda is a country of contrasts, and we see a lot of progress being made in the country. The economy is growing. There are many positive signs that we've been able to see, but there's also a great deal of poverty that remains and much work that is for us to do. So we actually experience those contrasts ourselves because I work predominantly in the city with executive leaders, working on governance and leadership development, and Jan is predominantly working with people in rural areas, especially women, in empowerment and literacy training and so on. And so our experience of Rwanda is very, very different, even though we're both engaged in the same country. The ministry partner we're involved in is called the Association of Baptist Churches in Rwanda, and or the ABR, and we'll just tell you a little bit about this. This pastor is Pastor Anthony, and he is just one of many pastors. They have 365 churches in the Baptist denomination there, which is almost exactly the same size as the Canadian Baptists of Ontario and Quebec. So there's very much similarity there. However, the Association of Baptist Churches also has a number of other ministries. For instance, they have 40 schools, high schools, elementary schools, vocational training schools, and 1 university. They also have 2 health centers, and this health center is located in the region of Babazi in the west, They do basic medical diagnosis, especially for malaria and other typical problems that people have, especially for those who are in rural areas where they lack access to medical care. The ABR also has a number of needs in terms of church buildings, and Canadian Baptist Ministries supports the building of roofs. So in this particular example, this church, the church is responsible for raising the walls, and then Canadian Baptist Ministries will pay for the roof. In this case, they actually had all the rafters up for the roof, and a windstorm came and knocked them all down. And so it was a terrible tragedy for them. They had spent all their money, and the gentleman who is on the left in this picture is from our church in Ottawa. He's a builder, and he has built over 15 churches in Canada. And so with his expertise and a little bit of additional funding from CBM, they were able to erect the church roof for this building. This is a scene of a brand new church that's being planted just outside of the city of Kigali. They had purchased a piece of land, and this was an evangelistic service, inviting people from the neighborhood to come and to be exposed to the gospel. Many people responded and gave their hearts to Christ, and there's a new church that's just in the beginning stages there. And also as a part of their church planting, they're always also involved in social action. This is integral mission is the approach that they engage. And so in this place, they have 3 houses that they've built for families affected by the genocide. And so it's both evangelism, church planting, and social action married together.
And so this is our team in Rwanda. You can see Jonathan and I there. The gentleman right in the middle, Andre Sibumana, is a CBM employee, but he is the overseer of all the development projects. And then the gentleman with the beard, which way? Which side? Okay, you're going to point. Okay. The gentleman, Aaron Kennedy, he is our team leader with his wife, Erica, who's not in the picture. And then we also have the Bustons, who Sumitra mentioned, Daryl, who is in charge of evangelism and the theological school, not in charge, but partners with, and Laura Lee, who helps me with global discipleship with short-term missions. And then the most recent to the field, that they came just 4 months after us, are Ken and Wendy Dirksen. Ken is Andre's right-hand man and helps with all the development projects. And then Wendy, who is our CPA and helping with financial management, because the ABR had invited both Jonathan and Wendy to help with governance and financial management. So that's how it all came together. So there's quite a few of us, and we divide up. And we divide up with the different programs and mentor our Rwandan brothers and sisters as we walk together through everything. But we didn't want to go through everything with you today. So we're just going to show you the list up there of all the development projects that we do. And then Jonathan and I have decided today that we're going to tell you a couple of stories so that you can understand sort of what is happening in Rwanda, what we're doing, and not only that, but how we have been impacted as well.
So we were asked to share a little bit about livestock and how livestock influence and impact the lives of families in Africa. As we approach Christmas, you notice the CBM gift catalogs are out at the back, and giving the gift of a pig or a sheep or some other livestock is one of the options. And so we just wanted to tell you a little bit about how it affects and improves their lives.
And if I just mentioned, I believe this church had 54 sheep that you gave to pastors a few years back. And so we contacted Andre Sibumana to find out what's happening with those sheep, and he has sent these pictures. So these are your sheep in the picture. Oh, they were your sheep.
So we're going to tell you about every one of those 51 sheep this
Settle
morning.
in.
No, this is Pastor Etienne. He's in the region of Nyangahanika, and he and his wife are working in that region. And so after he had received the training from CBM, they gave him one of these sheep. He's raised the sheep, and the way that it works is that the first offspring of the sheep is given to a needy family in the community. And when that family receives a sheep, when it's old enough to give birth, the first offspring goes to another needy family. And so through that process, this particular pastor and his wife have assisted 5 families. So you can imagine 51 sheep would have a significant impact within the families and the communities. They also did a health evaluation in the community, and they discovered that some of the children were malnourished, and they were suffering from preventable diseases and problems such as worms and other things. So they were able to get medication through, again, it was the livestock that enabled them to save money so that they could afford medications to help with sanitation. This is another situation is where sometimes people receive a pig. The advantage of a pig is that they give birth to many offspring. And so when piglets are born, they can have a bigger impact on the family's economic situation. We met a different pastor in another region. He had received a pig. When we first met him, he was living in a very, very inadequate home with his 4 children. And he received this pig, and over the course of 3 years, it had given birth to 33 piglets. And in each of the 3 litters, they always gave the first piglet to a needy family in the community. But because of the other piglets, through selling them and so on, he was able to build himself a house. And for this pastor who's living below the poverty line, this is an incredible way that we can support him and support his work and ministry.
So I also work with Leticia. She's the head of the women's department. And she does a couple of different areas. I partner with her in women's empowerment, but also in women's literacy, which I know that your church has also been a part of. Because I remember that last year I was given notification that you had sent money for literacy, and we thank you for that very much. And so literacy makes a huge improvement in the lives of women as well. It started as a women's literacy program, but after the men started to see how much the women benefited, they started to complain, and they said, hey, we want to learn to read and write too. So we now have about 800 men who have graduated from the program, and we have over 5,000 women who have graduated from the program. So when we've been going back after they have, it's only a 6-month program that they go through, but in that time they actually learn to be able to read from the book of John by the end. That's about the level of reading. It's in Kinyarwanda that they study. And then they also learn to count, which is huge for them, because when they're in the marketplace and all of that, in order to balance how much money they went with and how much money they came home with, then that also raises not only their own self-esteem, but their self-esteem or their respect within the family, and it lowers domestic violence. So that is the key to literacy. And there was one woman who was in the program. She was 38 years old. Her name was Angelique. Go to the next picture. And she was orphaned at a very young age and had a very bad life. She was, at 17, she finally decided that she wanted to get out of this terrible lifestyle, so she married, quickly had 3 children. Then, of course, they fell into poverty quite quickly because she married a man who was also illiterate. So she kept going to different people and saying, can you teach me how to read? Can you teach me how to read? And nobody was willing to put the time into it. And finally, just a few years ago, she heard about the program through CBM and the ABR, and she learned to read. And so she said that beforehand her children had suffered from malnutrition because she had tried to grow vegetables and she didn't know how to do it properly. And then her husband, of course, was abusive as well, because that is still a major issue in the country. And she felt hopeless. But then, after the program, she joined the association. Often with graduates, they join together afterwards and they start a business together or a savings plan together. And for her, she decided to do a porridge business. So she ended up selling porridge, which of course is fortified with iron and vitamins, which helped to raise her children's health. She learned how to do kitchen gardens through the association so she could feed her children nutritious food. And then with the funds from the porridge business, she was able to send her own children to school, which of course breaks the cycle. And so she said that not only was this good for her family, but then she started to be respected in her community and in the church. And so she has now become a deacon in her church, and she also has even preached, which is very rare. This is a huge accomplishment, ladies, for her to preach when the pastor is away. And so here, a woman who 5 years ago was completely illiterate, now a deacon in her church, preaching when the pastor's away, respected by her husband, lowered domestic violence. That's what going to the literacy program does. And so here is her quote, her hope for the future. "My hope is to continue being a strong Christian by reading and learning the Bible. I will continue to expand my business to be financially independent. I will continue to keep my goat," she got a goat from the association, "and save until I can buy a cow. Owning a cow has always been my dream, and I hope my goat will help me get one. I will educate my children so that they don't go through the humiliation I went through being illiterate."
I'd like to share with you a story about one of the regional pastors. Regional pastors would be sort of like area ministers in our tradition, or perhaps in the Anglican tradition like bishops. They're in charge of a region. They look after all of the ministry aspects in that area. And so this is Pastor Aeneas. He has worked in the south. During the genocide, Pastor Aeneas, because he was Tutsi, he became threatened by his neighbors, and he was at very significant personal risk, he and his family. So they were able to flee the country and escape to a place of refuge in Uganda, which, of course, many people tried to do this but were unable to successfully flee. Anyway, he and his wife and their children, after the violence was over, they returned to their home region, searching out their family members. And tragically, they were not able to find a single surviving family member. 106 people in their family lost their lives during the genocide. And when he told me his story, it's so vast and so significant that it's impossible for us to even begin to imagine the suffering and the hardship and the anger and all of the emotions that are involved in that kind of a tragedy. Now, as he continued to tell his story, I learned that even in the midst of all of that suffering, in the midst of all of the anger and the disappointment and the sadness, he was in church one Sunday, and he really felt that God was saying to him, "There's a young man over here who has great leadership potential. You need to invest in his life and help him to grow as a leader." And the problem was that Pastor Aeneas was Tutsi, this young man was Hutu. And after everything that he had been through, all of the suffering that he had experienced personally, to reach across that racial division was a great challenge for him. Yet he was faithful to God. He reached out to this young man. He offered to pay for his university education so that he could go to school, receive his training, and that he would begin his journey towards becoming a leader within the Association of Baptist Churches. Now, those of you who were on the trip to Rwanda, the mission trip a few years ago, you'll recognize right away that it's Andre Sibomana was this young man that Pastor Aeneas helped out. Right in the worst time of his life, he was still faithful to God and willing to help out. He did go on to tell me, Pastor Aeneas went on to tell me that he experienced a miraculous healing in his life. He was praying in church one day, several months after he returned after the genocide, and he just felt the peace of God flood through his life. And he is now ministering in a church that is mixed with both Tutsis and Hutus. And so it's a great privilege for me to be able to work in leadership development and to come alongside these great leaders, both Pastor Aeneas and Andre Sibomana, and to be able to work with them and to prepare for a better future for the ABR.
And the last story we want to tell you about today is one that affected both of us very significantly. First of all, I work with this young woman, Ernestine. She is the project manager for orphans and vulnerable children, as well as Guardians of Hope and pastors' children as well. And so she is 30 years old. She's single, and she doesn't have any children. That is a huge stigma in her culture, not to be married by this time. Majority of women are to be married by 25. And so for her, she is still called a girl, even though she's 30, which has a lot of implications for her in her life and in her job and in her career. And so she was confiding this to me about her frustration, and I said, you know, Ernestine, I said, I know you love children. I said, but you are a mother to many, many children. And we work together, and I see her mother all these orphans. And when we get out of the car, she is swarmed by the children. And so she now has taken this as this is her calling, that she may not marry, or she may, but at this point in her life, she is just going to continue to be a mother to all these children. So she asked me 2 years ago if I would help her start a psychosocial support system. And we didn't have a budget for this at all, so we had to kind of see what things short-term mission teams had left behind, and we put them all out on the floor, and I looked through, and luckily 25 years of education kind of came back, and I said, well, we could do this and this and this. And we continued to help the children learn to express their emotions, deal with behavioral issues, and to create a sense of community and family for them and a hope for the future. So one of the days that we were there, we went, if you can advance, we went to the program, and we always have mothers involved with us because it's a sense of community, right? So there's children, there's teens, and there's mothers. And this mother, who we call Mama Abana, which means mother of children, she always comes faithfully. This is her. She's 50 years old, and she's sitting with her 11th child on her lap. After the genocide, her husband had been killed. She had 5 children at that time. And so in order to cope, she became the second wife of a Muslim man in the community. And so now she has 6 more children, and this man continues to visit once in a while, so she continues to have more children, which is an issue on its own, but don't judge because we have never walked in her shoes. And so she is a wonderful woman to all the orphans in the community. And one day we were doing an activity with the children where it was called the Web of Worries, and I'd cut the yarn into long pieces, medium pieces, and short pieces, and had a pile, and the children had to pull a piece of yarn out. If they pulled out a short piece, they had to tell me a small worry. If they pulled out a medium piece of yarn, they had to tell me a medium worry. And if they pulled out a long piece, a big worry. And so the children had all gone. We'd put the yarn back into the middle, and then she said, may I go? And I said, of course. And so she pulled out a piece of yarn, and it was a long piece of yarn. And she asked for a new house for her family. She, at that time, had 7 children at home with her. And I had stood in her house just prior to that. She had an indoor cooking fire with her 3 stones, and we only had enough room for 4 of us to stand around the fire to pray, and then the mattress that the 7 of them slept on was behind us. So I knew that she really needed a house. We put the yarn back into the pile, we prayed for everybody's worries, we finished our program, and we went home that week. The next time we came back, she came running across the grass saying, Insu, 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 which means house, house, house. And I thought, what's she talking about? So I grabbed Ernestine and I said, explain. And she said that the government had contacted her that week and said if she could erect the walls, that they would provide the sheeting for her roof of her house. So the Guardians of Hope group got together and built the frame of the house. Then the next 2 weeks later, we had a short-term mission team that was coming, and we changed our plans, and we made mud bricks all day and the next day, and then they dried for a couple of weeks, and then the youth from our program got together and put the walls up for her, and then the government came with the sheeting, and she now has a new house. So she was so excited. She still needs doors and windows, but she was so excited to show us her house because she had made these beds that were off the ground, out of sticks and grass, but she still managed to do this for her children, and that was quite an accomplishment. You'll see in the picture that she has corn growing on her property as well. She doesn't eat that corn herself. She also grows things like Irish potatoes, and that's all that her family eats is Irish potatoes, 1 meal a day. She saves the corn and other produce to sell at the market so that she can pay for school fees. So we walked around her house, we oohed and we awed, and then we prayed together, and then we started to head back to our car. And when we got back to our car, she had arrived with 5 ears of corn for us to bless us. So I always cry at this part, and my mother's here today too, so I'm going to cry more. But the fact that she was so felt so blessed by us being there that she wanted to bless us in return. It was a very, very humbling experience. And it was a time where Jonathan and I both kind of looked at each other, and you can't say no to the corn. And neither of us like Rwandan corn either, so it was extra hard. But we took the corn graciously, and we thanked her, and we realized it's not about what we're going there to do. It's about relationship. It's about the fact that we have worked together with her in this psychosocial for the last 2 years and developed a relationship. And that's what she values most. She has never asked us for any money. She has never asked us to send her children to school. All she's asked for is a relationship of friendship. We accepted the corn. And we cried in the car.
And so when we meet people like Mama Abana, and she's just one of many, many people in a similar situation, it reminds us of this passage of Scripture where Jesus observed the poor widow putting her 2 coins into the temple treasury. And what's remarkable about this passage of Scripture, there are 2 really significant things. The first one is that Jesus noticed the widow in the first place, because she was at the very lowest end of the social structure. Here in the temple, they were surrounded with many people who were very wealthy, very well off, and yet it was this poor widow that Jesus pointed out to the disciples. And the second thing is that he does not say, I have compassion or pity for this woman. Instead, he says, he looks at her with admiration, and he says, look at the example that she is giving for us. She is giving out of her poverty. And in a very real sense, she's really living the words of the Lord's Prayer. Give us today our daily bread. That she was able to trust God in her poverty to provide for her daily needs. And sometimes in the West, we have the illness of affluenza, that we have so much that we learn to trust our own investments, we learn to trust our own income, we learn to trust in what we can do for ourselves, and God is left out of the equation. And so for us, it's been, this is so important that we have not just gone to Africa to teach and to share, but we've gone to Africa to learn and to receive. And it's been a tremendous blessing. And so we share this picture with you on the screen of Mama Abana with these 5 ears of corn, so precious to her, because we want you to know that as you support us, as you pray for us, you're there with us when we receive these pieces of corn. You are our partners. We could not do what we do without your help and support and your prayers. And so this morning we wanted you to know about this one life that has been changed. And we wanted to say to you,
Mirakoze Chane.
Thank you very much. God bless you.